Shane Gandy was found dead today. He was a cast member on MTV's Buck Wild.
DM Brown, who rose to fame as an MTV reality TV star, has died after a long battle with cancer.
MTV made ordinary 20-somethings into household names, dropped them into houses with strangers, sent them off-roading through the mud, or handed them a camera crew for a wedding day gone sideways. We watched them fall in love, fall apart, and fall into fame almost by accident. But somewhere between the reruns and the reunion specials, a lot of these faces quietly disappeared from the headlines, and not because their 15 minutes simply ran out. Today, we are counting down 15 MTV stars whose deaths never got the attention they deserved. Some of these stories will genuinely shock you. Grab a seat, because a few of these you are absolutely not ready for.
Clay Adler.
Before there was The Hills, before there was Laguna Beach Mania, there was a scrappy little spin-off called Newport Harbor. The real Orange County, and one of its breakout faces belonged to a shy, surfer blonde teenager named Clay Adler. He was 17 when cameras first found him, cast as the quiet best friend with the boy-next-door looks who could not quite work up the nerve to talk to girls, despite half of Newport Beach apparently being in love with him. Off-camera, Adler was chasing something bigger than reality television. He wanted to act, and for a while it looked like the show might actually be his launching pad. He landed small parts, including a role on Make It or Break It, and along the way, he became genuine friends with a then up-and-coming actress named Jennifer Lawrence, years before she was a household name herself. But Adler's story took a devastating turn that almost nobody outside of his inner circle knew about until it was already over. In March of 2017, Adler was in the California desert with a group of friends, casually target shooting, when he turned a gun on himself. He was rushed to a hospital and died the following day. He was only 27. Investigators later confirmed there were no substances or alcohol involved. This was not a party that spiraled out of control. Friends and family said Adler had privately struggled with mental illness for years, something he never let slip on camera. In one final act that says everything about who he was, Adler had signed up to be an organ donor years earlier when he got his driver's license, and doctors told his father that his organs went on to save 4 or 5 lives. A quiet ending for a star who spent his whole career trying to be seen, but who was clearly fighting a battle nobody around him fully saw. So, if a heartthrob from a sun-drenched teen soap could be hiding something this dark, what happens when the tragedy is playing out on camera in real time for the entire world to watch? DM Brown. DM Brown did not just compete on MTV's The Challenge. She became the emotional backbone of it. She showed up to her very first competition, Fresh Meat, in 2006, having just been diagnosed with ovarian cancer weeks earlier, and instead of hiding it, she told her teammates the truth. From that moment on, cameras followed one of the most public cancer battles reality television has ever captured. She beat it once. She came back for more seasons, cracking jokes, forming alliances, and refusing to be defined by illness. She beat it a second time in 2013 and returned to competition looking, by all accounts, like she had truly come out the other side. Then, in the summer of 2014, while filming Battle of the Exes 2 in Panama, Brown collapsed on set. She was airlifted to a New York hospital, where doctors discovered her cancer had returned for a third time and spread into her colon and stomach. What followed was a public countdown that broke the hearts of an entire generation of MTV fans. Brown kept tweeting updates, kept fighting, kept asking for prayers, right up until her final days. She died on November 14, 2014, at just 32 years old, surrounded by friends and family. MTV dedicated the remainder of that season to her memory, and years later, former castmates helped launch a congressional ovarian cancer caucus in her honor. Brown's death devastated the entire Challenge family, but tragically, she would not be the only cast member from that very same season MTV would be forced to mourn within weeks. So who else did the network lose in that brutal stretch of 2014? Pedro Zamora. If you want to understand how much power a reality show can actually have, you need to know the story of Pedro Zamora. Long before The Real World was known for hot tub drama and staged rivalries, its third season, set in San Francisco in 1994, cast a 22-year-old Cuban-American man who was already a nationally recognized AIDS educator. Zamora had learned he was HIV positive at 17, and rather than retreat from the world, he threw himself into activism, eventually testifying in front of Congress. When he joined The Real World, he became the first openly gay, openly HIV-positive person American audiences had ever really let into their living rooms on a weekly basis. What happened next made television history. Zamora fell in love with a fellow activist named Sean Sasser, and the show captured their commitment ceremony, the first same-sex union ever broadcast on American TV. Audiences who had never knowingly known anyone with HIV suddenly felt like they knew Pedro personally, which was exactly the point. But as filming wrapped in the summer of 1994, Zamora's health was visibly declining. He was hospitalized that fall, and doctors gave him only months to live. He died on November 11, 1994, just hours after the final episode of his season aired on MTV. He was 22 years old. President Bill Clinton personally credited Zamora with humanizing the AIDS epidemic for millions of Americans who had refused to look it in the eye. He remains, to this day, one of the most influential figures ever to appear on reality television. But here is the unsettling part. He was not the only real-world alum whose on-camera health struggle would eventually become the story of their too short life. Shaheen Gandhi. Buck Wild only lasted a single season on MTV. But Shaheen Gandhi became its breakout star almost instantly. He was the show's ultimate good old boy, a self-described outdoorsman who ditched his cell phone, loved four-wheeling more than almost anything else in life, and became known to fans simply as the guy who wanted to marry mud before he wanted to marry a person. He was 21, disarmingly charming, and by early 2013, MTV had already announced the show would be renewed for a second season. Gandhi never got to film it. In early April of 2013, he and his uncle went out mudding late at night after leaving a local bar. When they failed to return, friends and family reported them missing, and a search party eventually found their 1984 Ford Bronco stuck in a mud pit roughly a mile from Gandhi's home. Inside were 3 bodies: Gandhi, his uncle David, and a family friend named Donald Myers. Authorities determined the vehicle's exhaust had become submerged in the mud, filling the cabin with carbon monoxide while the engine idled. All 3 men died of accidental poisoning. MTV immediately suspended production and ultimately canceled Buck Wild entirely out of respect for the tragedy. Gandhi was only 21 years old, a star whose entire persona was built around living fast and loving the outdoors, killed by the very hobby that made him famous. It's a gut punch of an ending, but it turns out MTV's reality universe has lost more than 1 star to a health disaster nobody saw building until it was already too late. Frankie Abernathy. Frankie Abernathy walked into The Real World, San Diego in 2003, looking like she did not belong there, and she knew it. Punk rock, heavily tattooed, and fiercely private, Abernathy quickly became known as the season's self-declared outcast, memorably announcing on camera that she was simply too punk rock for the show before leaving partway through filming. What most viewers did not immediately clock was that Abernathy was also quietly managing cystic fibrosis, a genetic lung disease she had been diagnosed with as a small child, and one that comes with a brutally shortened life expectancy. Producers wove her illness into the season, and Abernathy became one of the first mainstream faces many young viewers ever associated with the disease. After leaving the show, she moved back to the Midwest, worked retail jobs, got more tattoos, and started designing purses out of old vinyl records. She eventually relocated with her family to Wisconsin in late 2006, chasing a milder winter that her weakening lungs desperately needed. It was not enough. On June 9, 2007, Abernathy died at her mother's home from complications of cystic fibrosis. She was only 25 years old, the second real-world alum MTV had lost, following Pedro Zamora more than a decade earlier. Her castmates were reportedly devastated, several admitting they wished they had stayed closer to her after the cameras stopped rolling. It is a sobering reminder that reality shows only ever capture a few months of somebody's much longer, much harder story. And up next, one MTV star's story ended in the most violent, most publicly discussed way on this entire list. Ryan Dunn. If you grew up watching Jackass, you know Ryan Dunn. Alongside Bam Margera and Johnny Knoxville, Dunn helped build the entire absurd, stunt-driven empire from the ground up, starting with homemade skate videos that eventually became a global franchise. He was the guy willing to get hurt for a laugh, appearing in every major Jackass film and hosting his own spin-off shows on MTV afterward. Off-camera, though, friends say Dunn was quietly battling something the show never captured: alcoholism, something castmate Steve O has openly discussed in the years since. In the early hours of June 20, 2011, Dunn left a Pennsylvania bar with a passenger production assistant, Zachary Hartwell, and got behind the wheel of his Porsche. Investigators later confirmed Dunn's blood alcohol level was .196, more than double the legal limit, and that he was driving well over 100 miles per hour when he lost control, crashed through a guardrail, and slammed into a tree. Both men died at the scene. Dunn was only 34. Dunn's death hit the Jackass family in a way few people expected. Fans were used to watching him walk away from explosions, brutal wipeouts, and stunts that looked impossible to survive. For years, he had built a reputation as someone who could take unbelievable punishment and somehow laugh it off moments later. That made the news almost impossible to process. Across social media, tributes poured in from celebrities, skateboarders, and longtime viewers who had grown up with the franchise. Many admitted they initially assumed the reports had to be another prank because the idea of Ryan Dunn actually being gone felt unbelievable. His closest friends struggled just as much. Johnny Knoxville described the loss as devastating, while Bam Margera was photographed breaking down at the crash site only hours after learning what had happened. Steve O later reflected that Dunn had a generous spirit and an infectious sense of humor that often got overshadowed by the outrageous stunts audiences saw on television. Behind the chaos was someone his friends considered loyal, funny, and deeply caring. That contrast made the tragedy even harder to accept, reminding fans that even the people who seem fearless on screen are still vulnerable once the cameras stop rolling. The Jackass franchise has dedicated multiple films to his memory in the years since, right up through its most recent installment, and his death remains one of the most talked-about tragedies to ever come out of MTV's stunt comedy world. It is proof that the danger on these shows was not always staged for the cameras. Dunn's tragedy also sparked a wrongful death lawsuit from Hartwell's family against both Dunn's estate and the bar that kept serving him that night. A legal battle that dragged on for years and ultimately settled privately. And unfortunately, Dunn was far from the only MTV star whose off-screen struggles turned fatal. Valerie Fairman. Valerie Fairman was only 15 years old when MTV cameras first found her, pregnant and scared, for the second season of 16 and Pregnant back in 2009. The show documented the birth of her daughter, Nevaeh, along with a rocky, drama-filled relationship with the baby's father. For a lot of viewers, Fairman's episode became one of the more memorable, more emotionally raw entries in the entire franchise. But life after the cameras stopped rolling did not get easier for Fairman. It got harder. In the years that followed, she was arrested multiple times, including on a prostitution charge in 2015, and her family later said publicly that they believed her sudden fame at such a young age had contributed to a downward spiral involving substance abuse. On December 21, 2016, Fairman was found unconscious at a friend's home in Pennsylvania. She was rushed to a hospital but could not be revived. She was only 23 years old, and the coroner's office confirmed her death was the result of an accidental overdose. Her adoptive mother later gave her daughter, Nevaeh, a necklace containing some of Fairman's ashes, so she would always carry a piece of the mother she barely got to know. Fairman's story is a heartbreaking reminder that being cast on a hit reality show at 15 does not come with a manual for how to survive the fallout. And she is sadly not the only young MTV star whose life ended far too soon after the cameras turned off. Christopher Big Black Boykin. Before he was Big Black, Christopher Boykin was working as a bodyguard for a rising professional skateboarder named Rob Dyrdek. Their real-life friendship turned into television gold when MTV built an entire show around it, Rob and Big, which followed the towering deadpan Boykin and the hyperactive Dyrdek as they adopted mini horses, broke Guinness World Records, and generally caused chaos across the Hollywood Hills. Boykin's dry sense of humor made him an instant fan favorite, and he later carried that popularity into Fantasy Factory and ridiculousness. What most fans did not know was that Boykin had a heart condition serious enough that he had a defibrillator implanted years before his death. In early May of 2017, he was hospitalized in Texas and placed on a heart monitor. On May 9th, his heart stopped, and despite hospital staff working for roughly 30 minutes to revive him, Boykin could not be saved. He was pronounced dead that afternoon at just 45 years old, with his rep and multiple outlets confirming the cause was a heart attack. Dyrdek, visibly shattered, posted an emotional tribute online, calling Boykin his brother and saying he could not believe the friendship that built an empire had ended so suddenly. Boykin left behind a young daughter and an entire generation of fans who had no idea their favorite gentle giant had been quietly managing a serious heart condition the whole time. And speaking of stars whose reality show friendships turned into real, lifelong bonds, one MTV alum's death came in a freak accident that stunned even the most extreme sports-hardened corners of the network. Michelle Parma. Long before the challenge became the multi-season juggernaut it is today, it pulled its earliest competitors straight from Road Rules, and one of the standout faces from that era was Michelle Parma. A former Dallas Cowboys cheerleader, Parma appeared on Road Rules, Europe, bringing an easygoing, adventurous energy that made her a favorite among fans of the early franchise. She later returned for one of the earliest real-world/Road Rules challenge crossovers, cementing her place in MTV competition history. After stepping away from television, Parma moved back to Texas and started a new career as a flight attendant. On October 19, 2002, she was traveling with her cousin Mandy on a highway just north of Houston when a 16-year-old driver heading the opposite direction lost control of his car, crossed the median, and struck their vehicle head-on. Both Parma and her cousin were pronounced dead at the scene. Parma was only 27 years old. MTV released a statement calling her one of the nicest, most genuine people to ever appear on one of its shows, and longtime fans of the franchise still cite her death as one of the earliest reminders that these were real people living real lives long after the cameras stopped following them. Her story marked one of the first times MTV's reality world had to publicly grieve a competitor, and fans of that early Road Rules era still describe her as one of the show's most underrated cast members, someone who brought heart to a franchise that could otherwise lean heavily on drama and stunts. But it was tragically far from the last time a challenge star's life would be cut short. Sam Sarpong. Before Sam Sarpong ever stepped in front of an MTV camera, he was already a fixture of high fashion, becoming one of the first black male models to front a major campaign for Tommy Hilfiger, a partnership that lasted more than 6 years and had him walking runways for Versace, Gucci, and Dolce & Gabbana. When MTV came calling, they cast him as a co-host of Yo Mama, the trash-talking competition series he fronted alongside Wilmer Valderrama for 3 seasons, becoming a familiar, easygoing presence to millions of viewers. Sarpong's death, however, shocked absolutely everyone who thought they knew him. On October 26, 2015, witnesses reported seeing a man standing outside the railing of the Colorado Street Bridge in Pasadena, California. Police negotiators spent nearly 7 hours talking with him before he ultimately jumped. He was pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner officially determined that he had taken his own life. He was only 40 years old. His agent released a statement describing him as someone with a pure heart, who always went out of his way to help others. And his sister, television personality June Sarpong, later spoke publicly about the devastating loss. Sarpong's death remains one of the most jarring examples on this entire list of a star whose public persona, easygoing, magnetic, always smiling on camera, gave absolutely no hint of the private pain underneath. And unfortunately, he is not the only MTV personality whose sudden passing left fans searching for answers that never fully came. Ryan Knight. Ryan Knight arrived on The Real World, New Orleans in 2010, with an easygoing charm and a will-they-won't-they relationship with castmate Jemmy Carroll that fans obsessed over for years. He carried that popularity into multiple seasons of The Challenge, becoming a franchise regular known for his laid-back humor and genuine friendships across casts. In November of 2014, just weeks after DM Brown's death rocked the Challenge community, Knight was found dead at a friend's house in Kenosha, Wisconsin, on Thanksgiving morning, after a night out with friends. He was 29 years old. The medical examiner's initial autopsy was inconclusive, leaving fans and castmates in an agonizing limbo for months, until toxicology results finally confirmed the cause the following spring: an accidental combination of methadone, tramadol, and the anti-anxiety medication Xanax mixed with alcohol in his system. His death, arriving so soon after Brown's, meant that same season of The Challenge was forced to dedicate its finale to 2 fallen cast members instead of 1, an emotional gut punch for a fan base already reeling. Former girlfriend Jemmy Carroll later admitted she almost did not return to the franchise afterward, saying it simply did not feel right competing without him there. Knight's sudden loss remains one of the darkest chapters in Challenge history, but even that brutal stretch of losses was not the last time MTV's extreme sports world would be blindsided by tragedy. Eric Rohner. Eric Rohner was not a traditional reality star in the sense of being cast in a house with strangers. He earned his MTV fame the hard way, as one of the daredevil athletes on Nitro Circus, the extreme sports spin-off built around Travis Pastrana and his crew of professional stunt performers. Rohner was a pioneer of ski-base jumping, someone whose entire career was built on pushing the absolute limits of what the human body could survive. On September 28, 2015, Rohner was performing a skydiving stunt for the opening ceremony of a celebrity golf tournament near Lake Tahoe, California. He was the third of 4 jumpers descending toward the course when his parachute caught in a tree roughly 25 feet above the ground. Bystanders scrambled to reach him, even attempting to climb on each other's shoulders in a desperate rescue effort, but Rohner could not be freed in time. He was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. He was only 39 years old, and he left behind a wife and 2 young children. Fellow extreme athletes across the industry, including many of his Nitro Circus castmates, publicly mourned him as one of the kindest, most encouraging figures in a notoriously dangerous sport. Rohner's death served as a brutal reminder that for stars whose entire careers were built on danger, the risk was never just for show. And he was, tragically, not the only performer from MTV's extreme sports world whose story ended in an accident nobody could have scripted. Don Vito Margera. If you watched Viva La Bam in the early 2000s, you absolutely remember Don Vito, the loud, gravelly-voiced, nearly unintelligible uncle whose speech was so hard to understand that MTV started giving him joke subtitles, poking fun at his resemblance to Marlon Brando's Don Vito Corleone. He became a fan-favorite target of his nephew Bam Margera's pranks and appeared across the Jackass and CKY universe for years, becoming one of the most recognizable side characters in all of MTV's stunt comedy world. Margera's post-fame years took a dark turn that overshadowed much of his legacy. In 2007, he was convicted on 2 counts of sexual assault against a minor stemming from an incident at a Colorado autograph signing, and sentenced to 10 years of probation that barred him from ever portraying his Don Vito character again. He largely disappeared from public life afterward, and his health steadily declined. By October of 2015, he had slipped into a coma due to worsening liver and kidney failure. He briefly woke up, but remained in critical condition, and on November 15, 2015, he died at a Pennsylvania hospital. He was 59 years old. His passing was confirmed by his sister-in-law, who said his organs had simply given out after years of declining health. Margera's story is a complicated one, remembered by fans for both the laughs he brought to the screen and the very real consequences of his life off it. And he was far from the last MTV personality whose off-camera struggles quietly caught up with them. Joey Kovar. Joey Kovar became a fan favorite the moment he stepped into the real world, Hollywood House, bringing an intense, unfiltered energy that made him one of the most talked-about castmates of his season. Producers leaned into his struggles rather than hide them, and Kovar later appeared on the 3rd season of Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew, publicly documenting his fight against addiction in front of millions of viewers. That fight, unfortunately, did not end the way fans hoped. In August of 2012, Kovar was found unresponsive, and he was pronounced dead shortly after. He was only 29 years old. Reports at the time pointed to a suspected overdose, and Kovar's death sent shockwaves through the reality television community, particularly among fans who had watched him try, on camera, to turn his life around. His family and former castmates spoke openly afterward about the brutal reality that addiction does not simply end because a television show captured someone getting help. Recovery is an ongoing battle, one the cameras do not always stick around long enough to see through to the end. Kovar's death remains one of the more sobering examples of how MTV's reality boom sometimes turned deeply personal struggles into content, without always ensuring its stars had the long-term support they needed once filming wrapped. And he is not the only true-life or real-world adjacent MTV star whose private battle ended in a way audiences never saw coming. Charlie Balducci. Charlie Balducci's brush with MTV fame came from one of the network's most beloved documentary-style series, True Life, when cameras followed him and his fiancée Sabrina for 4 months leading up to their 2002 wedding. The episode became a cult classic, almost entirely because of one infamous meltdown Balducci had at his own limo driver over being late to his ceremony. A rant so over the top, it got replayed on entertainment specials for years afterward. Balducci went on to found a non-profit arts organization in Staten Island and largely stayed out of the spotlight, aside from a nostalgic 2020 special looking back on his viral wedding day moment. On July 25, 2020, Balducci was found unresponsive in his Staten Island home. He was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 44 years old. His mother told reporters his death came as a complete shock, since he had not shown any signs of illness. Months later, the New York City Medical Examiner's Office confirmed the official cause of death: acute intoxication from a combination of the prescription oxycodone, hydrocodone, and alprazolam, ruled an accident. Balducci left behind 2 teenage sons, and his final tweet, posted just days before his death, urged his followers to remember that life gives no guarantees. It is a haunting sign-off from a man best known to the world for one chaotic, hilarious day, and a reminder that the people we watch fall in love, fight, and grow up on our screens are living entire complicated lives we only ever get a glimpse of. 15 stars, 15 very different lives, and 15 endings that most casual MTV fans never even heard about. Car crashes, freak accidents, silent illnesses, and private battles that the cameras never quite managed to capture in full. These were real people, living real lives, long after the credits rolled and the cameras moved on to the next hit show. If this list hit you harder than you expected, you are definitely not alone. Which one of these stories surprised you the most? Let us know down in the comments. And if you want to see more of the reality stars who defined a generation and the untold stories behind them, make sure you are subscribed, because there are plenty more where this came from.